Hello, Julian Assange. It was sunny outside. I still felt something akin to minor guilt at lying in bed on a sunny day. Just having the option of not having to get up in the morning carried guilt. He'd spent most of his life not having to get up in the morning, not working, living off social security benefits. There's a certain amount of guilt involved in it, but it was easy to rationalise away. In a world that accepted the waste of half of its food production each day, and for thousands of kids to die of hunger each night, rationalising guilt away came easy. He would have liked to fight against the injustices of the world, but it seemed like a global system with no head to cut off that wouldn't pop back up immediately. Manus had not spent his life researching and exposing corporate crimes or hacking computers. He wouldn't know where to begin with research. And when it came to computers, he was technologically challenged. His lifestyle choice to just take drugs and scrounge off the state as much as they would allow had been as proactive a revolutionary stance as he could manage, which the less enlightened members of society failed to understand, instead viewing him as a lazy, good-for-nothing, opportunistic bum. But Moss didn't hold it against him. They were but for fortune, after all. No, regardless of mainstream social exclusion, condemnation, and relative poverty for someone living in the privileged sector of the planet, Alice had often enjoyed his choice to lie in or get up. This morning, however, he had allowed himself to be robbed of all enjoyment. This morning, he was cursed with the knowledge that he had pushed a young woman away from him. She liked to keep her options open, and he had texted her more or less demanding that she give him a definite date for their next meeting. In a normal relationship, this might well have been acceptable, but this was not a normal relationship. In fact, this was not a relationship. Avril had insisted from the start she didn't want a relationship. She liked to call round once or twice a week, just for sex. But sex had nothing to do with anything, so Avril said. But after a few months, Manus got used to her, and when she didn't call for a week or so, he was pushing her for rights he didn't have. It was in the contract. She was younger than him by over 2 decades. All she wanted was a bit of fun. Instead of being grateful, he had pushed the last woman who would ever fuck him away. Now, there was guilt. He didn't want to get out of bed all day. He was stupid. Now he was condemned for his crime, sentenced for the rest of his life to be alone. The suffering and the pain. A much favoured and familiar haunt, the old suffering and pain. He could have led with it all day. But he had things to do. It was Assange's birthday for a start. Manus was to meet people at St Stephen's Green at 1:15. They were going to deliver a letter to the Australian embassy. Originally, they had just talked of making a cake, and Manus had thought to hassle a friend or two over to play guitar, maybe see if they couldn't get something like a small street party going. But that had been before Avril had ditched him. Since then, Manus was lacking the strength or enthusiasm to hassle anyone. Yet again, his broken heart had gotten in the way of political activism or positive action of any kind. Kieran O'Reilly had instigated the protest. Amongst other things, Kieran had taken a hammer in his hands and damaged American warplanes that would otherwise kill or harm the poorest people in the world. Acting like a responsible citizen had earned Kieran hard time in high security prisons and Manus's respect. So perhaps it was for Kieran as much as for Julian that Manus would get out of bed and make his way into town. Manus imagined Julian Assange wouldn't be overly impressed with their protest. Nobody could be. There would be half a dozen people at the most. Most passers-by wouldn't know who Julian Assange was. Against the tsunami of banners and all the technology money can buy, which told people that what Julian Assange was doing just wasn't important, Manus and a few others would stand with a single banner saying, "Free Julian Assange." The few standing with the banner, if they got noticed at all, would look like weirdo nutters. Manus was going to go, perhaps just to show some solidarity with the weirdo nutters. Around 11 a.m, George Kerwin called for Manus. George was one of them smart-ass bastards from a fairly privileged background. a former chairman of a Trinity debating society, who would come up with a nuanced argument against anything he said. Moss is one of those dumbass fuckers from a fairly unprivileged background, where debating skills ran from shouting to yelling, personal threats to physical violence. Once asked George why he wasn't going to the protest, George said he didn't protest anything because he thought that it was ineffective. Mills asked, if all protest was ineffective, then should we do nothing? George backtracked saying he very seldom protested and saved his energy for the ones he felt were important, which did not include Assange. Furthermore, George wasn't sure Assange was his political ally, since WikiLeaks had not just published, but directly funneled leaked documents to the Trump campaign first. George continued, directly dealing with the dime store Hitler was a naive in the extreme and a wrong act. It didn't ring true for Manus that Assange or WikiLeaks would be dealing directly with the Trump campaign. Though as usual, he hadn't done much research and couldn't say with any certainty. George, as always, was certain. There was a server in WikiLeaks communicating with the server in Trump Tower. George swore it with rather more venom in its delivery than the truth needed. Trinity's training got lost, and George could be as emotive as any uneducated thug when he defended a false position. Well, it said that since he had started speaking for Assange, he had heard all kinds of negative fact and fiction, all of which, for Malice, sidestepped the main issue. Publishing the crimes of the powerful should be applauded, not a punishable offence. For none of these other reasons, fact or fiction, would Assange be imprisoned. WikiLeaks was known all around the globe for telling the truth. It had an effect on the way the world was perceived, with potential to affect how its citizens and environment were treated. Allowing the WikiLeaks founder to be imprisoned sent a clear message ringing around the world. Exposing government and corporate crimes would not be tolerated. George lost some of his evangelical zeal against Assange and relented with, there wasn't enough evidence against him for a conviction, but enough to lose him the support of the left. How had the so-called left gone along with this crap? How had the most effective exposer of corporate and government crime been turned into the left's enemy? A person of no worth? A person they least wanted to defend? The answer was obvious. Corporate power had attacked Assange because he exposed their crimes, and the corporate media swamped the world with their attack. But it was the left's acceptance of such obvious diversions and spurious attacks that bothered Manus. Manus had a frazzled brain. Too much drugs, drink, punches to the head. He couldn't always take in a lot of info, and he could retain less. George hadn't done half as much drugs or drink, and had probably never been punched in the head in his life. Manus wasn't fit for arguing with him. The two were friends of a sort. They had both protested against the Dublin housing crisis. They had both helped out at a social centre. They helped each other sometimes. For all their differences, they had things in common. Nick phoned Manus and arranged to meet him at St Stephen's Green. Like Manus, Nick came from the north. Like Manus, Nick had been called names and spat at a lot when he walked the streets as a youth. They both shared the experience of gangs of loyalist thugs throwing bricks and bottles and chasing them. Manus was a Taig, and Nick was black. Whereas Manus became a great runner, Nick developed fighting skills. Manus figured Nick had always tried and usually managed to beat the bastards at their own games. He could fight better, play sports or chess better, and stand at the bar and talk bullshit about football better than anybody. Nick was over 6 feet tall, and when he let his dreadlocks out of his big hat, they came down to the floor. Manus and Nick had coffee, sat on the grass on St Stephen's Green. Manus babbled about his own child's graduation from primary school, how it looked like an American teen movie, and how he felt depressed since he had just pushed that woman away, and how he hoped to get a coffee with Chomsky van together, which would permanently play Chomsky speeches or Democracy Now! Episodes or Counterpunch News or any alternative to corporate news and views of the world. Everywhere you looked, There was a corporate message. One small screen wasn't going to achieve much, but it just might keep his personal sanity. Nick loved the idea. Manus and Nick met May O'Byrne at the main gate outside St. Stephen's Green. Nick had to go to pick up his kid then, and May and Manus stood alone. May had a petition letter, but said she wasn't that pleased with it because it quoted Obama. The fact that Obama had been responsible for so many deaths in his time put May off. Manus shrugged. He didn't reckon the Australian government would give a shit what the letter said. They were never going to protect Assange. What government in the world was going to thumb its nose at America? May said there was another Australian coming. A woman called Kate. Manus tried to check himself from his ridiculous notions of finding a partner, long or short term, and Kate, at his age, looking for a partner. How long did he think he had left? Still, his mind ran on. She would probably have rolls of fat hanging over her pants and a squashed up ugly face. He was shallow. She turned up, fit looking and highly attractive. When May went to shake hands, Kate insisted on a hug. Manus got a hug too. A bit of much needed physical for Manus. Kate had been visiting her parents, catching a flight back at the end of the week. Just right for a non-committal shag on a holiday, thought Manus. Kate said she had emigrated to Australia on her own in the 70s. Manus heard that right. Emigrated in the 70s on her own made her around his age. Was that possible? Had he found an attractive woman from his own age group? Did she feel attracted to him? Youth went for sexual gratification. Age expected accomplishments, or at least a place in society. Manus was the least accomplished person in the world, with the lowest place in society. He had to stop with the negative self-image. It was that Avril ditching him thing. It was the getting no noogie. Being the least accomplished person in the world, or his place in society, didn't bother him at all when he was getting laid. Sid turned up with his bowler hat, scarf, waistcoat and corduroy trousers. Talented singer-songwriter. Sid and Manus were close enough in years. They talked of Kieran O'Reilly's unceasing efforts. They both did little bits down again, but Kieran was full-time, 24/7, year in, year out. They talked of their kids. Sid's daughter, born when Sid was in his 20s, was in her 40s now. Sid said he had been there when his daughter was a child, but he may as well not have been. Sid didn't drink now, but he had been a hard drinker. Manus was coming on 50 before a woman had decided not to abort his kid. Age must have granted him some semblance of sense then, as he had stopped drinking and hard drugging in order to look after his daughter. It had clearly been the better buzz. Liam arrived, almost in his 40s, with a 21-year-old son that he had fought for and gained custody over when the child was young. A clean-cut man from a stable background. Manus and Liam had put the movie Underground, the Julian Assange story, on a social centre before Assange's 6th year in detention. They were useless at getting an audience. They got the usual suspects. June, Sid, Manus, Liam, Dave and Brian. There had also been a new face, a Polish girl, who actually came to the protest the next week. Liam had remained upbeat and positive. The Polish girl was a new convert, one at a time, Even if he was getting laid, getting paid, and had a place in society other than lowest, Manus's optimism couldn't turn the idea of one person into the possibility of victory. Liam was realistic enough too, though. Like Manus, he saw no victory possible through their pathetic efforts. And like Manus, he didn't know any other tactics. And while the effort and its lack of effect made them feel useless, not to make the effort made them feel worse. Anne arrived. Manus had never met her before. She was writing a piece for a Russian magazine. Younger than Manus by a few decades in a flouncy dress. Manus' attention switched. Them flouncy summer dresses always got Manus. Sometimes he could be such a ledge. They walked through the park. Manus asked Sid if he had had much success as a singer-songwriter. Sid said, no, thank God. Why? Did you not want success? Asked Manus. To which Sid replied, my head's so big already, it would have blown up completely. Sure, I'd have had to get myself a new hat and everything. Manus understood how difficult it would be to cope with success and agreed with Sid's sentiment. But in actuality, he could have done with just a little bit of it. They walked through the park and after a wrong turn or two, found the embassy. Martine was there with his two kids, who were both under 10 years age. The letter requesting that the Australian government start looking after Julian Assange's human rights, signed by 2.5 pages of Australians living in England and Ireland, was read. Photos were taken. Alice held a banner. Free Julian Assange. That was it. Martin and his kids went off. Everyone else decided to go to the park for coffee and tea. And small buns with a single letter of the birthday boy's name on each one. 13 buns. They had the banner spread out in front of them on the grass. Free Julian Assange. Kids were still starving to death while half the world's food production was being destroyed. Ecological and nuclear disaster threatened the planet like never before, while the corporations' need for constant profit kept pushing us all towards said disaster. And Julian Assange was holed up in some room in London, threatened with life imprisonment for publishing the truth. And it was a beautiful sunny day in Dublin's St Stephen's Green. The group talked and exchanged phone numbers. Manus didn't offer or ask, and wasn't offered or asked for a phone number. Sid called to him as though the two should walk off together, but Manus stalled. He wanted to walk with Sid, but what was Kate doing? Liam was showing Kate where the museum was. Manus went too. Perfect. Liam would walk off and Manus could show her around. It's almost too pat. Walk and talk around a museum with an attractive woman he had met at a protest. Engage in conversation, curiosity glances. They would get some food. Time would pass. And she would have to get the last bus back out the country unless she wanted to stay with Manus for the night. As usual, his mind ran on fantasies, but his mouth said none. Liam hugged Kate goodbye. Manus hugged her goodbye too. On a walk through town, Liam asked Manus if he would like to write a letter to Julian. Manus kind of shrugged his laugh. Manus had spent his life trying to ignore or block out what he thought he could do little about. And now he wanted to write to Julian Assange and say he supported him in his efforts to expose government and corporate crimes. Hopefully there were better, more effective supporters than Manus.